Well, due to tonight's schedule changes, we were unable to bring you Murder Rooms, but it will return to BBC One next Tuesday at 8:30.
Until now, we've only touched the surface.
Now, on BBC One, the news with Peter Sissons. It's 10 o'clock.
Terrorists attack the heart of America with catastrophic loss of life. Hijacked planes smash into and destroy New York's tallest buildings. Both towers of the World Trade Center collapse with thousands trapped. Another plane explodes on the Pentagon, mocking America's defensive might. In the streets, panic and the certainty that casualties are horrendous. Tonight, Britain imposes drastic security measures as Blair condemns the terrorist barbarism. Good evening. America came under attack today from international terrorists on a scale that made it more an act of war. The centre of New York is still smouldering, with America's two tallest buildings in ruins. Terrorists also struck with remarkable ease at the heart of America's defence, the Pentagon. Also in Washington, other government buildings, symbols of American power, were emptied as the terror spread. Air traffic is paralysed. Coast to coast, all key installations are on high alert. And amid the nightmare, the only estimate of fatalities is that they could run into many thousands.
Now, the World Trade Center was among the world's most famous landmarks, a giant monument to the power of global business and the market economy. The complex was the size of a small city. Tens of thousands of people worked there, but its architects never imagined it would have to withstand the kind of attack seen today.
The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center dominated the skyline of Lower Manhattan. When the World Trade Center opened in 1973, they were briefly the tallest buildings in the world. They were also potent symbols of global commerce and world prosperity. Looking at these archive pictures, it's hard to believe they've been reduced to nothing more than rubble. They were quite simply enormous. Each tower was 1,350 feet tall, 110 stories high. The World Trade Center was the largest commercial complex in the world, effectively a mini-city. 50,000 people worked inside, 90,000 visited the building every day. 1,200 companies had offices there, including American Express, Salomon Brothers and Deutsche Bank. There were also scores of international trade organizations. Below ground was a huge shopping complex and even a subway station carrying thousands of people to and from the center. So how could this have happened within an hour of the impact, the towers collapsing to the ground? Unlike most conventional skyscrapers, the towers had no interior columns to give them strength. It was the exterior walls which bore most of the load, and so the direct attacks were enough to weaken them and make them topple. This image is like a scene from a Hollywood disaster movie, yet it was happening for real. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Worldwide condemnation of the attacks has been swift, and so too have been the denials of guilt. Those responsible will have had money and resources available to only a few terrorist organizations. And the focus of the investigation into America's worst breach of security will inevitably fall on Islamic and extremist groups. As George Eakin reports, it'll be those responsible for previous attacks on US interests around the world who'll come under closest scrutiny.
To some, the horror and carnage inflicted on the United States today is a cause of celebration. This was the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, where many showed their approval of a day of unprecedented terror in America's backyard. A claim of responsibility was reported from one Palestinian group, but then swiftly denied. The Palestinian leader condemned the attacks.
We are completely shocked, completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Investigators hunting the organisers will first consider these were airborne suicide missions on a scale not seen since the Second World War.
I think it's almost impossible to believe that a hijacker could convince an American domestic airline pilot to commit suicide by flying into the World Trade Center. I have absolutely no doubt at all they had trained pilots. We know in the past that they've had pilots who have been perfectly capable of flying aircraft, and this can only be the only, I think, answer to this. American pilots would not do this, but Arab fundamentalists may well be prepared to.
And it's this wealthy Arab fundamentalist that American officials are already naming as an immediate suspect, Osama bin Laden. He controls and finances Al-Qaeda, an umbrella network of Islamic militants, and he's vowed to destroy the United States. Bin Laden is accused of masterminding a string of attacks, including the US embassy bombings in East Africa 3 years ago, which killed more than 200 people. In retaliation, the Americans fired cruise missiles at training camps used by bin Laden in Afghanistan. They put a $5 million price on his head and led a worldwide crackdown on Al-Qaeda. Afghanistan's ruling Taliban, which continues to offer bin Laden sanctuary, insists he isn't capable of carrying out attacks like today's. But bin Laden is suspected of involvement in the last attack on the World Trade Center 8 years ago. 6 people died when a bomb exploded in an underground car park. His associate, Ramzi Youssef, was jailed for that, and for plotting to blow up a dozen American airliners over the Pacific, a plan which in some respects foreshadowed today's terror. While the possibility isn't being excluded, no one's suggesting that the devastation of such high-profile international targets like the Pentagon and the World Trade Center is domestic terrorism. The sophistication of today's attacks, with highly trained perpetrators and their synchronization to occur within 2 hours, point towards months, if not years, of preparation. Does all this mean then that a rogue state might be involved? Some experts are skeptical.
Countries have realized that as governments, their involvement in terrorism has cost them more than it's gained them. And so there are very few countries left who are in the real terrorism business. Obviously, some governments fund groups that may conduct terrorist acts, but that's very different than actually providing government support for it.
State condolences flood in, yet it seems highly unlikely, if not impossible, that the biggest and bloodiest terrorist operation ever could have been planned and prepared without a single government around the world even noticing. George Eakin, BBC News.
Well, as we've heard in the past half hour or so, about 4 or 5 hours after the initial attack on the World Trade Center, the Salomon building collapsed as well. 47 stories of the Salomon building. We've just received these latest pictures out of New York, taken obviously from a slightly different angle, showing us another version of the collapse of the Salomon building. 47 stories of office block going to the ground. Following on from the aftershock, one would assume, that's a different way of describing it, the aftershock of the Boeing aircraft having flown in to the World Trade Center. Those are the latest pictures out of New York. That was the Salomon building, going the same way as the twin trade towers that used to make up the World Trade Center. And they're an image that we've quite quickly grown very used to, that billowing debris and smoke engulfing all around it. Those are the latest pictures out of New York. One of the latest reports talks about 200 firefighters having been killed or having died as a result of the work that they were involved in. The AFP news agency is saying that 200 firefighters were killed in the collapse of the World Trade Center. They were perhaps involved in what was going on in the basement of the second tower before it collapsed. There is an underground shopping arcade, a subway station as well. But at the moment, what you're looking at are the latest pictures of the collapse of the Salomon building.